Hello and welcome to Torah Thoughts. The portion of the Torah that we read this week is, there's actually two portions, Tazriah and Metzorah, and I'll get to those in a minute. Today is also the first day of the month of Iyar, so Chodesh Tov everyone, and the beautiful thing about Chodesh Iyar is it is widely believed because the name Iyar is the acronym Ani Hashem Rofecha, which means I am God, your healer, and this month is actually a very, very auspicious month where people can pray for healing, and hopefully there will be a lot of healing. It does seem that there's good news going on, so hopefully this month will be when all this bad news ends. Today is also the 15th day in the counting of the Omer, which also makes it 6 weeks and 2 days of this wretched isolation. Well, for me anyway. So, moving on to this week's Parsha, Parsha Tazriah. Let's talk about both the theme in both Parshas, Tazriah and Metzorah. Discuss the issue of ritual uncleanliness or ritual impurity, and how someone who is in any category of ritual impurity has to stay away from everyone else, and they have to stay away from anything holy, and anyone who comes into contact with someone in such a stage of impurity also takes on either the same or a lesser version of that impurity, and they got to go through some other, also some sort of a process to obtain ritual purity. So in Hebrew it's called tumah, the impurity. And so it starts off with, again, there's different types. The first one is when a woman gives birth, isha ki tazriah. If a woman will produce seed, let's call that the translation for the time being, and we'll go into what the actual translation is a little bit later. And she gives birth to a boy. There's a certain amount of time where she is impure in the same sense as during her menstrual cycle. Now, I want to talk about the word impure, tameh. People mistake the meaning of impure, especially when a woman goes through a menstrual cycle, and especially with the whole the modern women's lib movement and everything. How dare you call a woman impure just because she's going through a natural biological function? So I want to be clear. The word tameh, it's translated as impurity, but there is no real translation for it into English. The best way to translate it is some sort of a lack of holiness. You're unable to come in contact, or you're not allowed to come in contact with something holy if you are in that stage. And this applies to many things which, if you commit a good deed, you commit something that you're commended for, and in fact it makes you spiritually holy, but it makes you physically lacking holiness. For example, if you bury a dead person, it is considered a tremendous mitzvah to bury a dead person, but once you come into contact with that person, you have to go through that stage of ritual impurity. And I think we're living through some, and again, the Parsha of Tazriah and Metzorah literally means a leper. The Parsha of Metzorah talks about how you come out of that stage of impurity and what kind of rituals you have to go through in order to get back into society, so to speak. And so all of this concept of impurity, it's interesting that we're living in times right now where we're beginning to learn the idea of when you're required to stay away from other people, when you're required to not have contact with certain people or certain things for a certain amount of time, and then anyone who does have contact with you now falls into that same stage and they're not supposed to have contact, this whole concept of contamination. We're going through a stage where people are beginning to realize it's not a negativity upon you. Okay, I've been, not in isolation. I was in isolation for 2 weeks. Thank God I turned out to have not had any symptoms. But I'm still social distancing and staying in my house for as long as possible. And several times, I'm sure that's not just me, plenty of people, I thought I had symptoms, and so I isolated. I thought I was exposed, so I isolated, and then I came out of isolation. This concept of being isolated, we realize that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're an ugly person, that you're a dirty person. It means there may be something that came in contact with you that could cause harm. And when a woman goes through childbirth, or when you come in contact with a person who died, in modern times we now understand the concepts of bacteria, the concepts of virus, the concept of spread. And the Torah discusses those concepts, but in a way that was possible for everyone to understand it in every time. When we read it today, we understand it in our terms. When people read it 1,000 years ago, had the Torah said the word virus or bacteria, nobody would have understood what it means. And so today we have an easier understanding, especially what we're going through in literally today. But I also want to address how these two parshas, the way these two parshas discuss the process of what goes on, it's literally one of the ways in which we can see how God runs the world, how God owns the world and controls it in a very literal sense. Now, in some cases, we see, like we saw in the Exodus, how God controls nature, and that tells you, well, He built the universe, He controls the universe. But that's only if you believe the story that you're reading. If you believe the narrative that God took the nation of Israel out of Egypt and He split the sea and He plagued the Egyptians and so on, then yeah, you believe that God controls the universe. And yes, there's proof of all that and evidence. I'm not going to get into that right now, but this is somewhat of another version, another level, if you will, of proof that God runs the universe and controls it. It's because in these two parshas, there are things written there that no one could have understood at those times. No one 3,300 years ago understood the concept of a virus. No human being. No human being understood the concept of spread of bacteria. But whoever wrote the Torah back then did. So first of all, we got the concept of when a woman gives birth, she has to remain, not in isolation, but she has to remain somewhat separated from holy things, separated from holy for some amount of time. And I want to get back to that. But I want to move forward also. The next stage of this next topic that's discussed is leprosy. And there are several kinds and several kinds of plagues, nega, that you know, the priest, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, who is, or I believe it's any priest rather, who is trained to look at these things, kind of like a modern day doctor would be trained to look at symptoms. And in each case, you know, it describes what the symptoms look like, and then it says, and the Kohen shall look at the condition, and if it meets certain criteria, the man is tameh, ritually impure. He's diseased. He needs to go into isolation immediately, man or woman rather. In some cases, you can determine that they're fine. In other cases, you don't know. So what happens? The Kohen has to put the person into quarantine. Now, I'm reading it the way it says it. He has to put the person into isolation for a week. He comes back 7 days later to check the symptoms. If the condition subsided, or it got smaller, or just disappeared, he's fine, he's released. If the condition didn't subside, but it didn't grow, if it grew, then we know if it spread. If the condition spreads, he's diseased, he has to stay in isolation until 7 days after the condition went away. Sound familiar? If there's no change, he stays in isolation for another week. And then if there's no change for 2 weeks, if there's no spread of symptoms for 2 weeks, he's considered okay and released back into the general population. This is what the Torah tells us. And the biggest minds and brains of modern times couldn't come up with anything more than that in our day and age, and in our situation. Well, the concept is pretty, to us, in our times, it's pretty self-evident. It's pretty much common sense. We don't know if it spreads. We're going to check. In the meantime, stay away from everybody else. Back then, that was a big deal. Back then, people who didn't believe in Torah said this is hocus pocus. This is nonsense. This is all, you know, and they ignored it. People who believed in the Torah didn't ignore it, obviously. Well, whoever knew this 3,300 years ago couldn't have been a human being. But I want to address also, you know, the next portion of it is, you know, when the person comes out of the isolation. Okay, Kohen comes, looks at him, sees that he's been fine. And he has to go through a whole bunch of different rituals of cleansing, if you will. And then the Torah discusses this not only for people, but also for clothing. Yes, you can have something in a non-living thing, clothing, or in the house itself. And again, you might ask, certainly for 50 or 60 years ago they would have asked, how does something living grow on your wall, and it should pose a threat that we should be aware of? Well, today we understand the spread of mold, for example. Yes, some things could grow in the right environment, even though it doesn't have a living host. And the Torah knew that 3,300 years ago. And there's a process of how you have to check. The Torah describes this process, and if you look into the details, again, it's very, very similar to what modern day scientists will tell you. What you have to do, what things to look for, and when you have, and when do you have to condemn the house? When do you just cut out the portion where the problem is, throw away the clothing, cut out the portion where the problem, and so on. And the sages, the midrash, the commentaries, they would ask: a person gets this type of leprosy, a person gets this type of punishment. It's usually punishment for something bad that they've done. They talk about lashon hara, talking bad about other people. This means that he needs to atone, and that's why when this thing is over, they bring a korban, they bring a sacrifice to atone for what they did wrong, which caused the condition. And I just want to mention as a side thing, in our system here, what we see is God gives the punishment, and then God takes away the punishment. It passes, and then we have to come to the temple and bring the sacrifice to atone for whatever we did wrong that brought on the punishment. It's not that first you atone and then God takes away the punishment. God takes away the punishment, and that's the mercy of God. He'll take away the punishment, and then you come and atone. Okay? Now, a human being wouldn't do that. When the bank forecloses on your house, they're not going to give you back your house because you promised to pay. Okay? God does do that because God controls everything. Okay? And He takes away the punishment because God knows whether or not you're atoning on the inside. And that's the other thing. In our belief, unlike other beliefs, I'm not sure about Islam, certainly Christianity, I'm not sure about the other polytheistic beliefs, but there is a widespread belief that to atone for a sin requires someone's got to pay. There's got to be a sacrifice. In some places they got to throw a woman into a fire to sacrifice to their gods. In Christianity, there's a requirement of blood, and that's why they believe that Yeshu, that's not with us. With us, the atonement is it's tshuva. The atonement is you feeling regret for what you did. That's what tshuva means. It literally means coming back. Okay? You come back and renew your relationship with God. And then the punishment is gone already, but then you atone because you show, in essence, a thanks, in a way, for God accepting your atonement. And you got to go through a process. And also you sacrifice something that's dear to you. And if you have money, you bring this kind of cattle. If you have less money, you bring a smaller cattle, or a bird, or wheat, depending on your abilities. You give up something dear to you, something important, something valuable. That's the word sacrifice. But anyway, going back, I mean, that was just as a side thing, but going back to the process, so the Midrash asks, okay, but why would a person's house develops a condition that now requires you to knock down a wall? And I believe it's Rashi who provides the answer. Sometimes God does that for your own good. And this is the belief, the theme that I've been talking about for quite a few weeks. God brings things to us that seem painful, and at times are painful, but it's for our good. And Rashi explains, for example, the house may have, from generations back, may have some buried valuables underneath a certain wall or beneath a certain floorboard or whatnot. And God makes you knock out that section of the wall, again, as an example, so that you can find what's in there. Okay, that's all well and good, and certainly we believe in that concept. Gamzu l'tova, everything that God does is for the best. But what we learn from here is everything is a plan, and everything is in God's hands. And that so much plays into, first of all, what we're realizing from this parsha. Science is, and I'm going to divert with a really short but quick story. There was once, it was Rosh Hashanah, I was in shul, I was in the synagogue, and it was just me and one of the synagogue staff was left in the building. And we noticed a woman looking at a flyer that was hanging in the window, and got into a conversation with her. Basically, she was looking at a flyer about the kaparot. If you're familiar, there's a ritual that we go through involving chickens, literally, a live chicken, between the holiday of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And recently, PETA and a whole bunch of animal rights groups decided to team up with anti-Semites, I guess you can say, and they're not mutually exclusive, but whatever it is, a mixture of the two, decided to come after the Jews for using animals as part of their rituals, and they go around protesting, you're being cruel to the chickens and so on. And admittedly, in some cases, they are being cruel to the chickens, not because it's part of the ritual, it's just because sometimes people do bad things. And yeah, they shouldn't be, but the ritual itself, it's a ritual. I mean, either you believe in it or you don't, but if someone believes in it, good, let them do it. So she came to look at this flyer, and the shul staff member says, asked her, would you like to do this? Would you like to come inside? And she said, no, I just want to make sure that you're not gonna be cruel to the chickens. You're not gonna harm them in any way. And his answer was, no, of course we're not gonna be cruel to the chickens. In fact, the Torah commands us not to be cruel to animals. And she says, yes, that's good, because otherwise I'm gonna bring my people here and we're gonna protest. Okay, fine. And I was a little bit bothered by the concept that's, to just have a thought go out there that, yeah, we're gonna be nice to the animals because you said so. We're gonna perform our religious ritual, but we're gonna modify it because you said so you should protest. No, that's not how it works. And so I said to her, just understand something, okay? We're not cruel to the animals because the Torah tells us not to be, not because you're gonna protest. Had the Torah told us to be cruel to the animals, we'd be cruel to the animals. Some people, you might watch this, you don't like it, but that's the way it is. What the Torah says, you do. We're good to the animals. Yes, you might feel, and it makes sense that you shouldn't be cruel to animals, of course. And God put that kind of common sense into us. But we do what the Torah tells us, not because we agree with it. We do it because the Torah tells us. The Torah says don't be cruel to the animals, and that's why we're not. And so I told her this, and she said, come on, you got to come into the 21st century. And my answer was no. The Torah is way, way, way ahead of the 21st century. The Torah was given 3,300 years ago, and everything known, everything that can be known, all information that exists is in there. You, by relying only on the knowledge that we can get from science and from observation, by relying only on that, you're first beginning to catch up to things that the Torah already taught us thousands of years ago. For example, cruelty to animals. We knew 3,300 years ago can't be cruel to animals, right? That's a concept that didn't exist always, right? Now you have animal rights groups and so on and so forth. You're just beginning to catch up to us. I got this 3,300-year-old document, and the fact that it's antiquated because it's so old implies that, whoever wrote it back then didn't understand what we understand today. Not true. And this parsha proves it. This is why I diverted to the story. This parsha proves it. Whoever wrote the Torah knew everything you and I can possibly know today. Yeah. And if you want to know anything about science and great, it's good. God gave us the ability to discover, but it's all in the Torah. Learn Torah to glean information, to get knowledge. Then, of course, explore and do experiments and everything. God gave us that, the ability to do that, to get more information from observation. Of course. But no information that you're ever going to discover is going to outdate the Torah, is going to supersede the Torah, and this parsha proves it. Now I want to go back. Having said that, I want to go back to the very beginning of the parsha. Isha ki Tazriah v'yalda zachar. A woman will, like I said, we're going to say, produce seed and have a boy. Now the common translation is a woman produced. She got pregnant. She fertilized, so to speak. But there's a midrash that tells us that the superfluous word, a woman will produce seed and have a boy. Why didn't you say a woman gives birth to a boy? This superfluous word is put in there not to be actually superfluous, but to teach us something. And what it's teaching us is, Isha ki Tazriah, if the woman produces seed, again, we'll go with that translation for the time being. If she's the one who does that first, v'yalda zachar, she'll give birth to a boy. On the other hand, if the man produces seed first, then it'll be a girl. So, the question is, A, what does that mean, and B, is it true? Okay. Now, I believe I read this from Rashi. I'm going to look it up later on to see if that's in fact it was Rashi, but for now let's assume it was in fact Rashi. Rashi lived 850 years ago. If it was someone else, again, it's a pretty much a common, right around that time, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, whoever gave us that analysis. So what does it mean? Commonly it's believed what it means is if the woman produces seed, the woman, again, hide your children if you're watching this video with your children, while the man and the woman are having intercourse, she climaxes before the man, she orgasms before the man does, then it's a boy. If the man produces his seed, meaning he inserts the sperm into the woman before she does, then it's a girl. Now, I can tell you that many people have tried that, and it doesn't work. All right? How do I know that it doesn't work? Because there are many people many very religious people who have a family full of girls, and they want boys. And believe me, they tried this. They still got a bunch of girls. And vice versa. Many families got a bunch of boys, and they want a girl. Still got a bunch of girls and a bunch of boys. So this theory seems to not work. It seems to be an old wives' tale, right? That if the woman climaxes first, it's a boy. If the man climaxes first, it's a girl. And so I ask myself, is the Torah wrong? That's not an option. Is Rashi or whoever said this wrong? Did they misunderstand their reading of the Torah? Possibly, listen, human beings. Or is our understanding of this interpretation wrong? So, here's what I discovered in doing some research. First of all, the word Tazriah, zera, when a man produces seed, the man produces seed, right? That's easy enough. The man supplies sperm to the woman. When the woman produces seed, does that mean a climax? Does it mean an orgasm? No, because we know now scientifically that the woman, when a baby is created, the man supplies one thing, he supplies the sperm, and the woman supplies the egg from the ovary, right? So when the woman has orgasm, or that's not when the egg is being supplied. Okay, so the equivalent, and by the way, the word Tazriah also has its agriculture. It means planting. Okay, when the sperm meets the egg, that's when the planting happens. The woman supplying the egg. Again, this is me thinking out loud, right? Or back then, this is what I was thinking. The woman produces the sperm. The woman produces the egg. Doesn't that mean the woman ovulates? Because that's when the woman supplies an egg. Well, let's test that theory. If the woman supplies the egg first, if the woman ovulates before the sperm enters her body, supposedly it's going to be a boy. Again, if we're going to go with this understanding of it, and if the sperm enters her body before she ovulates, it'll be a girl. Now, I went and looked into that. I did a little bit of research, and I found out that the egg has nothing to do with the sex of the baby. It's the sperm that determines the sex of the baby. If the sperm has a Y chromosome, it's going to be a boy. If the sperm has an X chromosome, it's going to be a girl. So let's call it male and female sperm, right? How does the timing of the ovulation have anything to do with that? Well, let's dig a little further. If the woman already ovulated, the egg is already coming its way down to the fallopian tube, and then the sperm enters the body, by the time the sperm gets there, the egg is already waiting. Which sperm will enter that egg? Well, science teaches us, modern science, that the male sperm, the X chromosome sperm, they swim faster than the female sperm. So the egg's already there. Who fertilizes the egg? Whatever sperm got there first. The male. She ovulates before the sperm enters the body. It stands to reason that the male sperm will fertilize that egg. On the other hand, the sperm enters the body, there's no egg yet. Then the egg comes down the fallopian tube. Which one is going to fertilize that egg? Well, the sperm are sitting there waiting for the egg to arrive. Okay, and sperm have a finite lifetime, right? Sperm die after, I think, 2 days or 3 days inside the woman's body. So if the egg isn't there yet, the sperm has to wait for the egg. What's going to fertilize that egg? Whichever sperm is still alive. Well, guess what? Science tells us that female sperm lasts longer than male sperm. It would appear that Rashi, or whichever other sage, their interpretation of the Torah, and certainly what the Torah said, is scientifically true. And this was said, written in the Torah 3,300 years ago. Folks, there is a God in this world. And he wrote a book. And every once in a while, when you read that book, you realize that whoever wrote this knows science better than any scientist will ever know. And once in a while we discover these little things, and then when we find out on our own that it's true, he knew. Rely on him. Rely on him about when he says you're going to quarantine, and then you're going to come out of quarantine, and hopefully it'll happen in time when he says, Ani Hashem Rofecha. That is the name of this month, Iyar, Aleph Yud Reish. Hopefully that, plus relying on Hashem, will bring us to the time where life will finally go back to normal, and we can sit around the table and finally go back to fighting about Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, it's much better in those times, right? Anyway, that's my Torah thought. Thank you for listening. Shabbat Shalom and Chodesh Tov.